Now, as we shared earlier today, 1 year ago began a time of transition here in the Denver church. Now, I know that 1 year can feel like a long time. For those of you who are high school seniors, even 1 week can feel like a long time right now. You're almost there. Hang in there. Please take that test. And yet, as us older Christians can attest, often 1 year is actually a short time when it comes to God answering your prayers. A year ago, the Denver elders and the core group were committed to hiring a new lead evangelist here for the church. At that time, after much discussion and prayer, we had a picture of what we were hoping for. Someone who could provide inspiring, strategic leadership in pursuing our vision to connect every generation of every community to God and to one another. Someone who had the passion and the experience and the gifts to train and inspire our ministry staff and congregational leaders. We wanted Denver to be a church that is able to raise up and send out leaders. Someone who is a team builder, who brings us together as a leadership in unity and collaboration. And as we shared last week, our elders and core group spoke with and interviewed ministry couples across the United States and even across the world. And today I can honestly say, with such excitement and enthusiasm, that we truly believe that God has answered our prayers and hopes in leading us to Chris and Megan Zillman. Now, we spoke quite a bit about Chris and Megan and their family last week, so I won't go into all the details again. Suffice it to say that on so many levels, the Zillmans feel like the perfect match for our church's needs and our dreams. They love family, as we will be joking about for many years to come. That's why they had 5 kids. They love the family ministry. They love raising up leaders. They actively support overseas mission work. And they are passionate about seeking and saving the lost. Just this spring, their region in Chicago of 250 members invited 20,000 people to church. This last week, I received calls from literally all over the country from different church leaders saying, "The Zillmans, you guys hit the jackpot. Denver is going to do awesome." And so on behalf of the church, I wanted to share this passage from Joshua 1. When Joshua took over the leadership of God's people, the Bible says that God told him, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And at the end of that passage, basically the people responded by saying, "Joshua, we are ready to follow you as you follow God with courage and faith." So Chris, today, the Denver church says the same thing to you. We believe that God has given us the legacy and the vision of filling Metro Denver with His gospel. Amen. We believe also that God has raised you up for just a time as this. And so we say to you today, be strong and courageous. We are committed, and we are excited to follow you and to support you as you follow our God. And so now, brothers and sisters, I present to you our new lead evangelist from the Denver Church of Christ, Chris Zillman.
I love what's going on with the stage here and all the flags. It's like addressing the United Nations, so I want to thank you for inviting me. In my life, I have applied for 9 mission teams overseas, and I've been rejected for every single one of them. When I was in college, when my wife and I, we weren't married yet, I would always go to all these mission church planting meetings, hoping that they would send Megan and I along. And of course, I wanted to be a missionary, but I also knew that if they picked me to go on the church planting, that they would probably recommend that we would get married. And so this was also my plan to get married as soon as possible as well. It did not work, and they did not take the bait. I want to thank everyone for the warm reception that my wife and I have received from you. This is a very exciting time for us. Of course, it's also a little sad when you leave a home that you've made for 11 years somewhere. But we're so looking forward to coming here and meeting all of you. Yeah. Now, my wife and I are high school sweethearts that later became Christians in college. And what's important to note, and something you need to understand, is that my wife was in love with me fully, hopelessly, and first. Okay? Now, she may tell you, when she comes, a different and corrupted version of But she's not here, so you won't have to be pained by having to hear her recreant version at all. Now, we're in the process of readying our house to sell. And so I have to fix everything that I should have fixed 5 or 6 years ago, so that other people can enjoy my house. But this last week, it started raining. Extinction level event rain in Chicago for 5 straight days. And I hired a painter to come over to the house because my kids had destroyed some ceilings in our house. And so I had him come over, and he came over for 2 days and was working on the ceilings in our house. And on the very last day, it was the 5th day of rain, I was downstairs working. He said, "Hey, Mr. Zillman, can you come up here?" And I went upstairs, and there was just water coming through the ceilings that he had just finished. And so, more than ever, I began to feel that I'm subject to the whims of an irresponsible universe. And maybe you've had things happen to you that make no sense. And maybe you feel that your life is not within your own control or within your own grasp. And we all have well-laid plans that the universe lays to rest. And you sometimes wonder to yourself, what is it that actually matters to this universe? Now, those who are agnostic in their interpretation of why we are here often address the universe in the way that some of us may address God. Yet, when I think about the universe, and if I were to characterize the universe as a personality, I would say that what matters most to the universe is equilibrium and balance. The laws of thermodynamics seem to describe this perfectly. So what happens as random moments to us are simply the universe leveling things out and creating different states of parity. It's almost as if the universe were a judge whose verdict is always designed to achieve a general symmetry. Ultimately, the universe is uncaring. In this picture, we have a digital representation of what the universe looks like if you were looking at it from outside of the universe. And you can see the symmetry that the universe creates. But looking at God this way, in the same way as we look at the universe, is to fundamentally misunderstand what the Bible describes about God. While God cares about equality, equality is not his goal. And while God cares about justice, justice also is not his goal. And while God cares about law and he cares about order, that also is not his goal. Ultimately, none of these things in and of themselves may even matter to God. Yet they seem to be the absolute and fundamental aim of the universe. So, what's my point? Well, we shouldn't take for granted what we believe matters to God. We are often influenced by how we see the world work and how we see the universe work, and mistakenly apply what we observe to the person of God. But God stands outside the parameters of a functioning universe, and what matters to him are not the cold, hard laws of a unified science. Now, many of you may say, well, of course not. I've never believed that what the universe values is what God values. Hang with me just for a second. But I would dare to say that most of you believe that what matters to God is what you observe in the universe. I think most people would say that the laws of the universe are what matter to them more than what matters to God. Has someone ever stolen from you? Has someone ever insulted you? Has someone ever misjudged or mischaracterized who you are in a way that has stolen opportunity from you? Has someone ever hurt you and have never given a thought about what they did to you? If so, I'm guessing that your most primal and immediate reaction is one that aligns perfectly with the universe. You want things balanced out. You want justice. You want recompense, and you want to be made whole again. I would say most often, our most deeply held values are not what most matters to God. Our most primal reaction to what happens to us in this world is not what matters to God. So the question is, what does matter to God? Go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 15. And we're going to read a very long passage here, but it's important to read the whole thing because there's a narrative progression here that matters. All right, so starting in Luke 15, we're going to begin looking at the parables of lost things. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around him to hear. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" Okay, this opening line is really important. All right, because Jesus is going to speak to something very specific as it pertains to these opening lines. He's sitting with the unjust, and he's sitting with those who break the law, and he's sitting with those who do the hurt. All right? And those who stand outside of that, those who are the judges, those who are the righteous, those who do what is good, are upset that Jesus is sitting and catering to those who do what's wrong. Verse 3, it says, "Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin.' In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So make me like one of your hired men.' And he got up and went to see his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to the father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." There are 3 stories here: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. These stories are meant to be read together and in order. Now, the first 2 stories focus on God's desire for his lost people to be found, and in the joy he feels when that happens. The third story has the same element, except there's one major difference. The third story actually deals with people, of course, not coins or sheep. And in the first two stories, the sheep and the coin were desperately sought after and pursued. While in the third story, the son was not pursued. And so we come to a tough truth as it pertains to people. Sometimes they come home, and sometimes they don't. The point I want us to observe in this story was the attitude of the father, not of the son. Because the father waited and he watched. The father was ready to show grace. The father was ready to connect. The father was patient. The father was engaged and devoted. And he showed interest whenever his son was going to show interest. And he did so whether or not he could influence his son. He was ready to invest in his son regardless of whether the son came home or not. This is important to the idea of what connection means. If we are building a relationship within our families, it's important that no one feels that love or support or investment will only be there as long as you behave a certain way. Now, what the son did was despicable. We don't have time to go into culturally what he did, but I can tell you that when Jesus would have read this parable, would have said this parable, people would have been aghast at the audacity and the boldness and the offense that the son was offering to his father. And yet the father waited for his return and was ready to connect again, even though his son had made all the wrong choices. Even though the son was in no place to ever again make things right. And that's what's important. The son could never make the father whole again. He can never give back to the father what he had taken from the father. Now, one of the focal points of this series of stories is how God becomes characterized as a running man. Now, we often read this story as we think of movies. Okay? We see the father disheartened and sad sitting. And then, off in the distance, the sun appears on the horizon. And the soundtrack begins. And the father, who's heartbroken and worried, doesn't notice his son at first. But then he looks up, and he sees him. And the soundtrack gets louder. And he begins walking towards the sun. And slowly, overcome by emotion, he begins to run to the sun. And the music is now at its height. And the father runs right to the son, and the two embrace, and the audience is in tears. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should probably note how someone from the ancient Middle East might have read the story. Because dignified and important people do not run. If you are respected, and you are accomplished, and you are competent, you do not run. For an old man to run is to watch a fool. And that's the story that Jesus is telling. The story of a foolish father blinded by his love for his son. God is a running man. Now we begin to see how the author might be answering the question of what matters to God. However, we have to continue the story to its conclusion, because I don't think that the father or the prodigal son were the climactic point in this cycle of parables. You have to see how Luke structures everything. He goes from 100 sheep to 10 coins to 2 people, father and son, to 1 person, the older son. It may actually be that the point of the story is the older brother. Verse 25 says this, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I've never disobeyed you. And you never gave me so much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He is lost, and now he's found. You know, Jesus is directing some criticism at the Pharisees here, and the Jews. And I would say, now that as ages have passed since the writing, that criticism could easily be leveled upon us. He's pointing out how badly the religious understood God and how badly they misunderstood how to be in a covenant relationship with God. You know, to many of the Jewish leaders of Jesus' day, they lived and taught that you gain favor with God through doing and through following the letter of the laws. Now, this is relational laziness and apathy. God is alive and he's dynamic. He's like us in many ways. There's no blueprint or script into having a relationship. There must always be a willingness to search out the heart of another person, to understand the other person, to compromise for another person. It's just like marriage. I mean, you can follow the letter of the law of the covenant of your marriage and have a terrible marriage. You know, this last week, my wife and I were driving the staff, and we were talking about Denver, and you know, we were talking about all the stuff that we like about it. We were noticing that the neighborhoods of Denver, the homes are really close together. There's not like backyards a lot of times. And we were talking about that, and you know how that's an adjustment. And you know, my wife was remarking, yeah, but we were in Oak Park, Chicago at the time, and she was like, yeah, but look, a lot of these homes are close together too. I was like, that's true. She's like, look, I mean, these homes are like 7 feet apart. And I don't know why I said this. And as I was saying it, I was trying to pull it back in. I said, honey, that's just absurd. Of course they're more than 7 feet apart. All right? And it's just a small comment. It's amazing. The bombs. That small comment can explode at just the right time. I'm not sure why I used the word absurd.
Neither is she. Yes, she's not sure either.
Of course, the homes were more than 7 feet apart, but I didn't need to use that word. And honestly, who cares?
Yeah.
But in that moment, I felt offended by her lack of metrics. And what pursued was the most inane, dumb argument that we've had in 4 or 5 days. And here's the thing. I have been faithful to my wife. I've never been unfaithful to my wife. I consider myself to be a good father. And I provide for my family. And the vows that I took when we got married, I have fulfilled. My wife has breast cancer, and that week she had a treatment that was really hard for her, and so for 2 or 3 days, I had to care for her and the ceilings that were leaking and the kids, and I had done my duty. And yet, in one thoughtless moment, I had upset our connection to one another. All the rules I had been following up to that point made little difference. I think that what is most sad is that law-obsessed people are often deluded into believing that they are awesome spouses, or they are great parents, or they are good friends because they followed the letter of a rule. And this was the older brother's problem. He looked at the whole situation as unfair because he was using the universe's measuring stick. I have put in way more work and time than my brother. I am the one who deserves a party here. Well, you see the problem. He believed he was owed something for what he did for his father. He didn't serve his father out of simple love or connection. He served out of a desire for gain. If he truly wanted a relationship with his father, a connection to his father, then he would have rejoiced with his father because that's what mattered to his father.
Right.
In the end, Jesus points to the Father and says, this is how we see relationships. And he points to the older brother and he goes, and that's how you see relationships. The answer to the question of what matters to God may be something more simple than we had imagined. It's connection. Every moral absolute, every biblical statute, every prerogative described about God's will, every strange and unexpected aspect of the meta-narrative might be born from this easy-to-understand motive: connection. For some divine reason, God wants connection between himself and between his creation. And that matters to him.
That's right. That's right.
You know, years ago, 10 years ago, almost exactly, we had gone to this conference in Virginia Beach. And it was an ICMC at Virginia Beach. And afterwards, us and my best friend Kevin Miller and his family, we had decided to stay together for a couple of days, so our families could have a little time together on the beach. And it was a blast. And Kevin and I, one afternoon, we rented these boogie boards, and we were just kind of out, about 50 yards into the ocean, just kind of bobbing on the waves. And I just got this feeling in the back of my spine. And I turned around, and I could see my wife and Kevin's wife just walking up and down the beach looking for something. And just the blood drained from my face. And at that time, we only had 3 kids. And so, I'm counting. And I can only see 2 of them. And we're missing Justice. And so I tear out of the water, and I'm just running to the beach. I'm like, where is Justice? Where is Justice? And my wife's like, I don't know. I just turned around, and he's gone. And so I was a lifeguard for most of high school and college. And so I'm looking at the water, and there's this thing that you do as a trained lifeguard. You close your eyes and you open them, and the first thing you see, you focus on. Because your mind, when you close your eyes gravitate to what's different. And so if someone's bobbing up and down in the water because they're struggling to swim, you may catch them when they come up. And so I'm just scanning the ocean. And after 4 minutes, I can't see him. And I'm becoming resolved that my son might be gone. And I told Kevin, I said, Kevin, get up to the boardwalk and see if someone took him. And so Kevin is like, Kevin runs up to the boardwalk, and he's ready to punch out anybody.
I love Kevin. That's Kevin.
He's got his shirt off, and he's hairy, and he looks mad. And I look at my wife, and she looks at me, and we have this moment where we think he might be gone. It's been 10, 15 minutes, and finally I find a lifeguard, and I say, we can't find my son. And they're like, how long has he been gone? I said, I don't know, 7 minutes, 10 minutes? And he gets on the radio, and like the next 15 seconds, it was the longest 15 seconds of my life. And he just goes, we got him. Oh. And he'd come out of the water, and the whole day, the surf was pushing everyone north. And so we kept telling our kids, every few minutes, get out of the water and then just turn the other direction and come back. Well, for about a half hour, for whatever reason, the surf started pushing everybody south. And so when he got out of the water, he went the wrong way. He'd already passed us. And so he'd walk like he was 5 years old, he was 6 years old, he'd walk like a half mile down the beach. And so I just took off after my son. I'm just running down the beach after my son. And I get to the lifeguard stand, he's just sitting there with his legs are dangling. He has no idea the torment that he's just put us through. And I grab my son and I hold him, and I walk back the whole way. And as a father, you do anything to find your kids. You would tear people apart to get your kids. In that moment, I was positive that I would split the ocean in half to find Justice. God will search every crevice and every dark place to rescue us. Amen. He will tear apart every house and every structure and every man-made artifice to find us. And he will abandon all dignity and bearing, running across time and space to repair the connection we consistently break. And then he asks us to do the same for everyone else in our lives. We are supposed to be a people that denies our basic instinct for recompense, instead for relationship. And we're supposed to be a people that does not value justice over mercy. And we're supposed to be a people that always chooses connection above the reconstitution of what was taken from us. Without any strings attached, the world should feel from us an irrational and foolish love. If you're visiting with us today, you have to understand that one of the most overriding motivations of God in Scriptures is his connection to you. You will misunderstand much of what is written if you don't first understand that motivation as a backdrop for everything God asks. And if you're here for the first time, there is no distance that you could have traveled from what is right or what is good or what is honorable that God would not run like a fool to get you back. And if you're here for the 1,000th time, that hasn't changed in any way for you either.
Right.
Amen.
He still runs for you. Amen.